Hello, good morning, and welcome again to the GRN chat. This month, February, we're happy to have with us Charles Aniagolu, who's been covering Nigeria for us over the last couple of years. Charles, you're Nigerian born, and you worked for the BBC for many years. Tell us a little bit about your history as a journalist.
Okay, well, just a bit about myself, and thanks very much indeed for having me here. I was born in Scotland, of Nigerian parentage. I went to school in England, in Nigeria, and in the United States. And I worked for the BBC for about 8 years. I went to ITN as a general reporter for a year. I went from there to Sky News as a producer. And then I eventually went to CNN, where I did some news presenting for a while, and then set up my own independent television production company. And what we do mostly now is producing a lot of international documentaries that focus on Africa for a variety of sort of people around the world. We do a lot of stuff with CNBC and other people, the international sort of broadcasters. And we've just shot a full-length movie, so we're sort of branching out. But we also do a considerable amount of work with GRN, which focuses more on news and current affairs, sort of news of the day.
Have you always been covering Africa all through your career, or is this something?
Yes, I mean, I think that I have done a lot of. I mean, I was a BBC. I covered. I was in Thailand for the BBC. I was in the United States. I was in the Caribbean, and I was in Africa. But I think I cut my teeth in Africa really because the BBC sent me as a correspondent covering Nigeria and West Africa.
What was that?
This was like in the mid-1990s, and it was in the sort of middle of a huge political crisis at the time. So I literally was thrown into the deep end. And I think I really got quite sort of familiar with all the vagaries and all the political problems of Nigeria and West Africa in general. And I think I fell in love with that part of the world. I mean, considering the fact that that's where I'm originally from. And ever since then, I've had a kind of love relationship in terms of coverage with West Africa, and particularly Nigeria.
To what extent do you feel foreign when you're going to Nigeria?
Well, I think at first I did feel foreign, and because I think I don't sort of sound generally like everybody sort of on the streets. People identify you instantly. But at the same time, my family is also fairly well known in Nigeria. My father died about a year ago, and he was a Supreme Court Justice in Nigeria. So to that extent, the name is known, but I do feel a little bit. There's a certain, if you like, reticence in terms of my cultural affinity with the place. But the truth as well is that because I'm a correspondent and I'm known as such, and I got to be quite well known as a BBC correspondent and a CNN presenter down there, it also gives me that slight distance away from the story, and a certain level of objectivity and trust from the people that, in spite of the fact that I am of Nigerian background, that this person is going to objectively cover the story.
Do you speak any local languages in Africa?
Yeah, I speak a bit of Igbo language. My family is from the southeast of Nigeria.
How much time do you spend in Nigeria every year? Because normally when we look for you, when we, when there's a call for Nigeria and we say, oh, where's Charles? And we assume that you're either going to be in London or in Nigeria. More often than not, I find you in Abuja. How much time do you spend in Nigeria?
Well, I'd say I'd spend about probably 6 months in Nigeria, 6 months in England. The reason is because we often I go to sort of shoot documentaries and that sort of thing, and I post-produce them in England. So the field production is done in Nigeria. And oftentimes when there's a story breaking, and I get these frantic phone calls from Daphna of GRN saying, where are you, where are you? I tend to sort of make my way down there if I think that the story is going to be over a longer period of time.
Because you know the work is coming.
Yes, absolutely.
So as a freelancer, how much do you depend on freelance work that is occasional, like GRN work, where we call you on the day, on the minute, and say we want you on air in half an hour? And how much are you working by sort of long-term orders, stuff that you've already pre-sold to a client and so on?
Well, to be quite honest, I depend less on things like GRN because it would make it slightly difficult to survive, given although the stories are really quite good when they come through. And what I like about GRN is the quality, the level of the quality of the clients. I mean, you've got a very good, very credible broadcasters from around the world. I do a lot of stuff with RTE, with CBC in Canada, CBS America, that kind of thing. And these are very, top grade broadcasters. So what happens is that we tend to use the GRN work to stay, if you like, in the loop as far as news is concerned. But most of our bread and butter stuff comes from producing documentaries for a variety. I mean, we've done things with the Adam Smith Institute in, DFID, and so it's a combination of corporate and sort of news type documentaries. So that's our mainstay in terms of our sort of resources.
Nigeria has been a lot in the news over the last year. What were your highlight moments of the last year?
Well, I think certainly the deterioration, rather dramatic deterioration, in the security situation in Nigeria in the last, I'd say, 6 months has brought. I mean, it's almost perverse that when there's bad news, it's a great time for a journalist. But I mean, the deterioration in the sort of security situation has been attracted tremendous attention internationally. And has given me opportunities to tell some great stories about what's happening in Nigeria. I mean, everybody's heard by now Boko Haram, the terrorist group, Islamic fundamentalist terrorist group that's been harassing the whole of Nigeria for the last year or so. But things have got really bad, particularly from the Christmas period up to now, when bombings. I mean, lots of bombings across the country. Certainly mostly concentrated in the northern part of Nigeria, but also I think things escalated after they attacked the UN building in Abuja, the Nigerian capital. And it's raised a lot of fears because the targets have been primarily Christian, and there's a lot of fears about whether or not this is going to possibly lead to a religious war in Nigeria. Nigeria's always had problems of ethnic conflict and religious conflict, and this is seen as an escalation of that. So to that extent, as I said, perversely, it's been a great story.
What has led the world interest in that? Is that the involvement of Islamic factions inside Nigeria? Is this the fact that there's a lot of foreign investment, oil? What was the main foreign interest in Nigeria?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a combination of elements. One of them is clearly the fundamentalist Islamic threat to, democracy, Western interests around the world. The other one is the fact that those interests are very closely tied to the Nigerian economy. I mean, there's tremendous amounts of oil coming out of Nigeria. Nigeria is it has the 8th largest reserves in the world. I think the 6th biggest producer of crude oil. And there's also the very worrying fear that Nigeria is the most populous black country in the world. It's also the most populous in Africa. It's got 160 million people, and the fear is that if Nigeria becomes destabilized, the implications for the West African subcontinent in terms of refugees and security, implications, conflict, and that sort of thing would be absolutely huge.
To what extent do Muslims feel threatened inside Nigeria?
I think that the threat from Muslims is considerably less than in other parts, because Nigeria is fairly balanced between Muslims and Christians in terms of population. And you've also got to remember for us that for a significant number of years, most of Nigeria's independence, Nigeria is going to be 52 this year. For most of those years, it's been ruled by Islamic leaders, some of them democratically, most of them through the barrel of a gun. Military dictatorships were dominated by the Islamic North. And that is why, in many ways, most people are perplexed that of the suggestion that, because, I mean, I don't know how much you know about the history of Nigeria, but recently the South has dominated political power democratically, South being the Christian South.
Yeah.
And it's raised a lot of concerns, in the North, that they've lost out on power, and there's all suggestions that this terrorism stuff is linked to that, and so on and so forth. But many analysts find that, that argument a little bit wanting, the reason being that they've dominated the country for many years of independence. I mean, you would have thought that under the circumstances they would have done a lot more for the Islamic North than they have, and the Islamic North is the most poverty-riddled part of Nigeria. So there's a lot of subtext to the main story.
How does the president, Goodluck Jonathan, deal with these feelings in the north? Has he gone there? Is he basically applying to the Muslim minority? Is it a minority?
Well, the Muslim, if you like, the Muslim North. You know, we don't call them minority because it is fairly balanced in terms of the population. I mean, Goodluck Jonathan's deputy, the vice president, is a northerner. I mean, he's Muslim. And so to that extent, there is some balance. And you've got to remember as well that Goodluck Jonathan took over from President Yar'Adua, who was a northerner, but who, by freak of circumstance, died after 4 years in office. And Jonathan took over constitutionally as a vice president. And the North wanted, to impose another sort of northern leader, but people said, well, the constitution says that this guy takes over. He took over, another election was held, and he won overwhelmingly. So I think the feeling with Jonathan is that the interests in the North that are being rubbed up the wrong way are those political, politicians who are very keen on having wresting more power, who are angry that somehow power has been taken away from them. And I think what Jonathan's tried to do is to try as much as possible to ameliorate tempers by they're sending a lot more resources to the north, but also people are worried generally that Jonathan is a weak president, that he's not handling the security situation as well as he ought to, that if perhaps there had been, Nigeria's had a history of military rulers and military rulers putting on civilian clothes and running for political office, that if there was a military ruler in his stead, that perhaps the security situation wouldn't be as bad as it is.
Does this bring thoughts inside the army? Is there a danger of a military coup, for example?
I would say probably not. I think General Obasanjo, who was the former head of state and who was a civilian, democratically elected president, did a fantastic job of breaking down the central command structure of the army in Nigeria. And it's impossible for them to come together in the way that they used to in the past to actually be able to carry out a coup. So I think the possibility of that is, and also the army has gone through, it's evolved. There's been a lot of, if you like, education of the military. You've had lots of exercises with the American forces, lots of joint operations and that sort of thing. And I think they've come to understand their place within a democratic structure.
Is there a sense of a civil war looming?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that would be, that has been mentioned. But I think if you look at the complexity of Nigeria, it's not a simple Islam-Christian situation. In between, you've got animists, traditional sort of African animists. You've got a whole, extraordinary mix of ethnic groups, 250. There are three main ethnic groups. One of them, the Yorubas, are almost equally mixed with Muslims and Christians. So it's going to be extremely difficult to have a situation where there's a division between. Who's going to be divided against whom? So I suspect it's going to be. I think the biggest fear for Nigeria is the potential of security deteriorating to the point where the country becomes ungovernable, but not based on ethnic or sort of necessarily religious ones.
Are they looking with worry at places like Sudan, that have ended up splitting between Muslims and Christians?
Well, part of the issue that's being discussed in Nigeria at the moment is that if you look at the history of Nigeria, the country was simply handed over independence on a platter of gold by the British. There was never any sort of, there was no fight like you had in South Africa and so on and so forth to try and wrest independence from the British. And also for administrative reasons, the British brought the Southern Protectorate and the Northern Protectorate together to make it easier to govern. And part of the argument that's been made in Nigeria has been that the Nigerian people themselves, since independence, have never had a chance to actually sit down and say, right, the British put us together. Do we really want to stay together? So that there's always the worry of balkanization. But what they want to do, what President Jonathan is being urged to do, is to try and do that, or certainly discuss the future of Nigeria democratically. So set up a sovereign national conference where all bits of different parts of the country would send delegates in, and there'd be a discussion. Do we really want to stay together? Because we weren't consulted when we were put together. And considering the conflicts that are evolved out of that sort of forced, bringing together, do we really want to continue as a country?
Is there other forces in the south that are thinking maybe we'd better get rid of the north, which is both Islamic and poor, as you say?
Well, to be honest with you, that is a very good question, because that's one of the central discussions in Nigeria at the moment, in the newspapers, in the press. The south is generally much wealthier. All the oil is concentrated in the south. Southern, the southerners basically run the economy of Nigeria. Even in terms of the geography, I mean, the north is big land mass, arid, close to the Sahara deserts. There's nothing that develops there. Most of the people are illiterate, which is why it's been easy for the northern leaders to exploit their people for a long time. And most Nigerians are saying, well, if Boko Haram or the north say they want their own state, give them their own state. I mean, if they want to split, let them split. And that's basically it, that people are saying we don't really need the north.
So what form is this discussion that you've mentioned about the future of Nigeria taking place, this national conference?
Well, at the moment it's taking place on the pages of newspapers. It hasn't become sort of something that a policy of government or anything like that. It hasn't evolved to that point yet. But there are groups, for instance, that used to be that had disbanded many years ago after democracy returned, following sort of a long period of military rule, that have come back together again to say, look, we disbanded because we thought democracy would give Nigeria a chance to really chart a future that would be all-inclusive and would help the country sort of move forward. And now we're seeing that we're regressing. So we've come back together, and our central reason for coming together is to push the point of a sovereign national conference. If the North do not want to be part of the country, if the Niger Delta region, which for a long time was the militant part of Nigeria, if the Igbos in the southeast who fought a civil war feel that there are a lot of things about Nigeria that make them feel like they're not they're not included, then perhaps it's time we sit down and not only find out what those central issues are, but whether or not there's any point in us staying together.
There was a lot of talk last year about the prospects of the Arab Spring in North Africa rolling down southwards to non-Arab countries. To what extent is this valid in Nigeria? Were there any echoes of this?
Well, I mean, potentially it could happen in the sense that, beyond the Nigerians being divided along sort of ethnic and religious lines. I mean, you've got the biggest worry for most people is their economic circumstances. And that could prove to be the trigger for a much bigger political conflagration. I think part of the problem is that if you look, for example, in the last few months, there was a huge national strike protesting against the increase in fuel prices. The reason that happened is that touches everybody's pocket. It's a bit like in England when you talk about messing around with the NHS. Everybody just gets like, what's going on here? It's the same thing. Nigerians feel that the only benefit really that they get from government are those fuel subsidies as a large producer of oil. So, and every time there's an increase in fuel, it affects food prices, transport, every single, education, everything that affects ordinary people. And so, on that score, it is possible that there could be, a sort of Arab Spring emanating from, dire economic circumstances, if people perceive that the situation is getting worse and they hold the government responsible for it.
One of the things that Nigeria has unfortunately got a reputation for is all these scams that have been going on over the internet. I think a lot of people in the West only know Nigerians from being emailed by some of them and asked for money and so on. How much is the government involved in trying to eradicate this? Where is it based in Nigeria? What is the story there? How does this happen?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, I mean, what they call the advance fee fraud scams have come down a lot. The government's done a lot of work there's been a lot of people, I mean, if you're found guilty for advance fee fraud abroad, there's a law in Nigeria that you're going to serve another term when you return. If you serve your term abroad and you're deported, you're going to serve another term. So it's served as a deterrent. There's been a lot of special police units set up to deal with it, and they've done a lot of work. I think the problem in Nigeria is that their public relations is terrible. They don't know how to sort of sell themselves. And it's a very inward-looking country, so they tend not to bother about sort of, but I mean, they've done a lot of work. They eliminated a lot of advance fee fraud. I think the bigger problem in Nigeria is officially sanctioned theft, which we call corruption. For a long time, Nigeria's been, I mean, that's part of the reasons why you've got the problems with the north and so on and so forth, that resources that are sent to those, different parts of the world are embezzled by politicians. So you've got these, I mean, there's a saying that in Nigeria there are more millionaires per square mile than in any other part of the developing world. And most of that money comes from ill-gotten wealth. So you find that, that's more of a worry. What is the government doing to stamp out corruption and to try and actually apply resources to more deprived parts of the country and so on?
And what does it do? Is there a sense that the media, for example, is coming after corrupt politicians? Are there this kind of journalism investigations into politicians? Is there any legal demand from the politicians to campaign, to declare their income? Are people kind of fiddling with their papers and trying to find out what they've been up to? What kind of atmosphere is there about political corruption?
Okay, well, what you've got to realize is that Nigeria has had 52 years, or certainly around 50 years of bad government. And the Jonathan government is probably the first, one of the few that's actually, well, starting from Obasanjo's government in the mid-2000s, 2000 to 2007. The Jonathan government is really the one that's trying to do something about it. And when you think about the fact that for years nothing's been done, it's an extremely challenging job. They set up something called the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, which aims at sort of getting politicians. I mean, in Obasanjo's time, they arrested the Inspector General of Police who had stolen billions. Quite a few governors have been prosecuted. Quite a few. Just recently, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives was arrested and locked up for embezzling huge amounts of money. So there are sort of positive noises being made in that direction, but I think it requires a lot more diligence on the part of the authorities, and also it needs to inspire confidence in the people. That's part of the reasons why they're very skeptical about anything to do with government. So there's a lot more work to be done, basically, in that direction.
It normally seems to be like a double-edged process. I mean, if you were somewhere like South Africa, on one hand, they're trying to come more and more against corrupt politicians, but this creates a world image of South Africa as a very corrupt place. Whereas actually the attempts to eradicate corruption are the ones that are bringing an exposure of corruption. Is there something similar happening in Nigeria? Is the public perceiving the government as more corrupt or as less corrupt?
I think I think that's a good point. I think there is a kind of knock-on effect when you've got the government attempting to do something about corruption. There's also been one party in power in Nigeria since democracy returned in 1999, and there is a sense, and I have no doubt that there are elements of truth there, that party has also tried to protect its interests with people who've been within it, who've been found to be corrupt and so on. I think the honest truth is that most Nigerians believe that the government isn't doing enough to fight corruption, that a lot more needs to be done. The newspapers we've always had a very vibrant press in Nigeria, very disputatious, very not afraid at all to point fingers at government. I think where the problem lies is with the amount of power that's been devolved to the security agencies. And also there's a lot of corruption in the judiciary. whether it's beginning to change. There's a new Chief Justice who's pretty much no nonsense. So we're going to see how things evolve.
Is it generally a free media? Is the press free?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the Nigerians, I'd say they're probably the freest press in the whole of Africa. Even at the worst times of military dictatorship, although there were incidents where some papers were closed down or whatever, Nigeria's press has always been very vibrant. It's not afraid to tackle the government on a variety of issues. So I would say that overall, it's been a generally free press.
Is it historically party affiliated, or is it private ownership?
No, it's private ownership. Certainly the press, as in newspapers and so on, have all magazines and news magazines. They've always been privately owned. You've had the broadcast press. Radio has been privately owned for a long time. Television tended to be in the hands of government, but over the last 20 years, that's also gone. I mean, television's been privatized, so you've still got national television, but a host of independent television news services that are quite objective in their news coverage.
What is Nigeria looking forward to in 2012? What is it going to look like?
I think, first of all, everybody wants to see a drastic reduction in the level of violence that's across the country. At the moment, it's concentrated mostly in the north, and people are like, well, great, let them kill themselves, let them fight themselves. But if it starts coming down south, the economic heartland of Nigeria is going to affect the bottom line, which is money, the GDP of the country, and so on and so forth. That's going to create a bigger worry, and that's the concern, that this stuff would have to be checked before it spreads. Even the Ghanaians, who are our next door neighbors, are beginning to worry, is this going to spill over into our own region? The good news is that recently the government, working with everybody from Mossad in Israel to FBI, CIA, the MI5, and so on and so forth, have really come up with a completely new unit to tackle terrorism. And recently they arrested one of the kingpins of Boko Haram, who was responsible for bombings that killed dozens of people across Nigeria over Christmas. So there is there's some sort of positive noises being made in that direction, and the hope is that will continue.
Is that perceived as positive by everybody? Because I suppose that this kind of intervention by countries like the US and Israel, which are considered to be quite anti-Muslim and so on, this could raise quite rebellious feelings in
Well,
the north.
it is raising some of that, but it's also been kept very quiet. And I think Nigerians are quite pragmatic. They're looking at what is the central problem right now. It's terrorism. It's a risk to you and me. How can we deal with it? We don't have the capacity to deal with it on our own. We need other people to come in and help us neutralize this before it gets out of hand. And so I think that if subsequently, there is sort of an extension of, suddenly there's a Mossad office in Nigeria, or there's a sort of a big FBI thing, and there's all these people are going to get a bit paranoid. But I think at the moment, everybody's saying whatever we can do to eliminate this threat, let's do it.
Charles, I'll have to let you go soon, but I just want to ask you one last question. You've mentioned a film that you're in the making of now. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, we just shot an international. In Nigeria, there's an industry called Nollywood. You've got the three main film industries in the world: Hollywood, Bollywood, and Nollywood. Nollywood is the Nigerian industry. It's become huge. It's the third biggest in the world now. But the quality of productions are very low. And what we tried to do was to take advantage of the name and produce a movie that's of a much higher quality that meets international standards. And so we brought some first-class directors of photography, got great equipment in, and we just shot the movie called Streets of Calabar, which is set in a part of Nigeria, the tourist zone of Nigeria, the southeastern tip. Lots of waterfalls and huge scenic mountains and that kind of stuff. And interestingly, it's actually about it's a comedy, but it's a dark comedy because people die in it. But it's about these two guys who are advanced fee fraud, the same fraud thing you were talking about, deported from England back to Nigeria. And they get to Calabar, the resort city, and try to get into some of their scams. The police clamp down on them and then use them to sort of try and catch a much bigger fish, you know, a big criminal called Didon. So that's basically what it is. And we've just finished shooting it. I'm going to start editing it maybe within the next sort of few weeks to a month.
Do you think it has maybe the prospect of exposing Nollywood a little bit to Western viewers?
I think so. I mean, I think Nollywood is already quite well entrenched within certain classes or groups of people in the West. I mean, you know, it's very popular in the Caribbean. It's very popular across the whole of Africa. Nollywood stars are huge. I mean, you know, from South Africa to Egypt.
Probably amongst Nigerian and African diaspora, even
Yeah,
in the UK.
I mean, in the UK, huge sort of audiences, but it needs to move a little bit further than that to reach a sort of you know, generally mainstream international audience, and that's what we're hoping our film can do.
Right, Charles, I'm looking forward to talking to you from Nigeria again, and good luck with the film, and thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much indeed.